What if the most influential artist of his generation didn't collapse because of fame, but because fame finally revealed who he really was? This is the story of Kanye West, a man once called a genius, a visionary, a cultural prophet. For nearly 20 years, the world rewarded his confidence, excused his chaos, and celebrated his defiance, until it didn't. One moment he was shaping music, fashion, and identity itself. The next, headlines replaced applause. Contracts vanished. Doors closed. Silence followed. Was this the fall of a troubled man, or the inevitable result of a system that mistakes brilliance for invincibility? Because this isn't a simple rise and fall story. It's a warning about what happens when talent grows faster than self-control, when mental illness meets unlimited power, when belief turns into destiny, and destiny turns into entitlement. This is not a tribute. This is not a takedown. This is not about cancel culture. This is an examination of how far a human mind can climb before it loses the ground beneath it. To understand the collapse, we have to go back to the moment no one believed in him at all. Before the world crowned him a genius, Kanye West was tolerated at best and ignored at worst. Born in Chicago in 1977, Kanye grew up in a home shaped by ideas rather than excess. His mother, a college professor, taught him to question, to read deeply, to believe that intelligence mattered. But the music industry had little patience for thinkers. It preferred archetypes, and Kanye didn't resemble any of them. At the dawn of the 2000s, he entered hip-hop through the side door. He was a producer, gifted, reliable, and visible. His beats powered hits for major artists, including Jay-Z at Rockefeller Records. Executives praised his work, shook his hand, and then quietly reminded him of his place. Make the beats, don't touch the mic. Kanye wanted more, and that want was treated like arrogance. He didn't look intimidating enough. He didn't sound street enough. In an era ruled by hardened gangster imagery, Kanye's openness felt like weakness. His confidence felt misplaced. His ambition felt embarrassing. And so he waited, and watched, and grew angrier. Then one night in 2002, everything shattered literally. Driving home from the studio, Kanye was involved in a devastating car accident. His jaw was broken in multiple places. Surgeons wired his mouth shut. Speaking was painful. Rapping was unthinkable. But silence had never been his strength. Weeks later, Kanye recorded a song with his jaw still wired, his words slurred, his breath uneven, his voice strained against metal and swelling. That song was called Through the Wire. It wasn't polished, it wasn't safe, it was raw survival. For the first time, the industry didn't hear ambition, they heard refusal. Refusal to vanish, refusal to wait for permission, refusal to be erased by circumstance. When the college dropout arrived in 2004, it didn't sound like anything else on the radio. Kanye rapped about faith without preaching, about education without sounding elite, about self-doubt without asking for sympathy. He questioned materialism while benefiting from it. He criticized systems while trapped inside them. Hip-hop had never sounded this conflicted, and listeners recognized themselves in it. The album wasn't just successful, it was disruptive. Instead of glorifying invincibility, Kanye made vulnerability aspirational. Instead of selling violence, he sold internal struggle. And in doing so, he rewrote the rules of what a hip-hop star could be. But success didn't calm him, it sharpened him. Late registration expanded his ambition, layering orchestras over conscience. Graduation refined his confidence, turning insecurity into spectacle. Each release felt bigger, louder, more certain. By 2007, Kanye wasn't chasing relevance anymore, he was dictating it. That year, he released Graduation on the same day as 50 Cent, an intentional collision between two eras. One represented dominance through intimidation, the other through identity. Kanye won. Sales told one story. Culture told a bigger one. Hip-hop pivoted. Emotion was no longer a liability. Intelligence was no longer uncool. The genre followed where Kanye led. By 2009, Kanye West was no longer just influential. He was untouchable. Every boundary he crossed seemed to reward him. Every rule he broke made him bigger. The world had learned to expect disruption from Kanye and to forgive it as long as the art delivered. Then came the night that froze the room. At the MTV Video Music Awards, a young Taylor Swift stood on stage accepting her first major award. Applause filled the hall. Cameras rolled. And suddenly Kanye West walked into the frame, took the microphone from her hands and said, "Yo, Taylor, I'm really happy for you. I'ma let you finish, but Beyoncé had one of the best videos of all time. 7 seconds. That was all it took. 7 seconds that rewrote his public image forever." To some, it was arrogance made visible, a powerful man humiliating a young woman on live television. To others, it was artistic rebellion, a refusal to accept industry politics, a man defending what he believed was truth, regardless of decorum. But beneath the outrage and memes was something far more revealing. Kanye wasn't trying to steal attention. He was trying to correct reality. In his mind, greatness was objective, and if the world failed to recognize it properly, he felt authorized to intervene, publicly, aggressively, without permission. The backlash was immediate. Headlines turned venomous. Apologies followed. Silence followed the apologies. And for a moment, it looked like the spell had broken. But Kanye didn't retreat. He retreated inward and returned transformed. In 2010, he released My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Critics would later call it one of the greatest albums of the century, a towering work of ambition, precision, and emotional depth, sonically flawless, conceptually grand, artistically fearless. Yet the album carried a darker undercurrent. It sounded like triumph, but it was built from isolation. The lyrics revealed a man who believed he was surrounded by enemies, critics, media, even fans who cheered too conditionally. Success no longer felt like safety. It felt like siege. The more the world praised the art, the more it ignored the man behind it. And the praise kept coming. Kanye's confidence hardened into certainty. His self-belief evolved into self-mythology. He wasn't just talented, he was chosen. Misunderstood genius became not just a narrative, but an identity. Then he expanded beyond music. Fashion welcomed him with skepticism. Designers laughed. Executives dismissed him as a rapper playing dress-up. Kanye absorbed the rejection the same way he always had, by turning it into fuel. Yeezy was not just clothing, it was control. Minimalist, severe, futuristic, designed to signal belonging to something higher than trend. And when Yeezy partnered with Adidas, Kanye didn't just gain wealth, he gained validation. Music, fashion, media presence, personal image, all under his command. By 2016, the empire built by Kanye West was massive. But beneath the success, the structure was straining. The pace was relentless. The expectations were endless. And the mind at the center of it all was carrying more weight than it could absorb. During the St. Pablo tour, something felt different. Kanye no longer performed only to entertain. He stopped mid-show to speak, sometimes for long stretches, about loyalty, betrayal, control. His words drifted away from music and toward suspicion. The energy in the room shifted. What once felt electric now felt unstable. Then the tour abruptly stopped. Shows were canceled without warning. Explanations were scarce. And soon the reality surfaced. Kanye had been hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. For a culture that had grown used to interpreting his chaos as genius, the silence that followed was unsettling. This was not rebellion. This was not spectacle. This was a system under collapse. When Kanye returned to public view, he chose transparency. He revealed that he had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a condition defined by extreme surges of euphoria followed by crushing lows, intense clarity followed by overwhelming confusion. At first, the admission brought sympathy, even respect. But the calm didn't last. As months passed, Kanye's speech grew less filtered. Ideas poured out rapidly without pause or protection. He spoke about being watched, about manipulation, about unseen forces shaping narratives around him. To some, it sounded like courage. To others, it sounded like paranoia. But to Kanye, it felt like awareness, like finally seeing the truth behind the curtain. In that mental state, he searched for something firm, something that didn't bend, something that promised order in a world that now felt hostile and chaotic. He turned to politics. When Kanye publicly supported Donald Trump, the reaction was immediate and explosive. He wore the red MAGA hat. He praised Trump's refusal to submit to criticism, his defiance, his dominance over the media. Kanye didn't describe Trump as a leader. He described him as proof. Proof that a man could ignore rules, provoke outrage, and still survive. Proof that controversy could be worn like armor. Proof that apology was optional. But for many of Kanye's fans, especially within the black community, this alignment felt like betrayal. Hip-hop had long framed itself as resistance against oppression. Now one of its most influential voices appeared to stand beside power structures many believed were responsible for that oppression. The tension intensified in 2018 when Kanye made a statement that echoed far beyond music or politics. He said that slavery sounds like a choice. The words hit with force. Pain spread instantly. Anger followed. Generations of trauma felt dismissed in a single sentence. Some attempted to interpret his meaning philosophically. Others refused to soften it at all. Kanye did not retreat. He argued that discomfort was necessary, that true freedom required radical thought, that he was not denying history but challenging how people related to it. Yet the more he explained, the further people pulled away. What made this period especially tragic was not just what Kanye believed, but how isolated he had become while believing it. The voices that once challenged him were silent. The systems that once slowed him down were absent. He was surrounded by attention but cut off from grounding. Art, belief, politics, identity all merged into a single volatile current. Kanye no longer separated ideas, he embodied them. And when those ideas collided with reality, the damage was public and immediate. The man once praised for expanding culture was now feared for destabilizing it. And beneath the outrage, beneath the debates, one question grew heavier with every appearance. Was Kanye West finally speaking truths no one wanted to hear? Or was this the sound of a mind losing its center under unbearable pressure? The answer would not arrive through argument or applause. It would arrive through faith, family, and a final attempt to be saved. After politics scorched his public image and controversy hardened into habit, Kanye West did something no one expected. He went quiet. Not the quiet of defeat, more like the quiet of a man backing away from the edge, staring down into something he couldn't name. And then out of that silence, a new Kanye emerged, dressed in simplicity, speaking about God, telling the world he had been transformed. He didn't hint at faith, he announced it. In 2019, Kanye declared himself a Christian in a way that sounded less like a confession and more like a proclamation. He stopped using profanity in his music. He spoke about salvation, purity, rebirth. The language was absolute, as if he had found a switch inside the mind and flipped it. For many people, the change felt shocking, not because celebrities don't find religion, but because Kanye's religion arrived with the same intensity as everything else in his life. Total, dramatic, unignorable. And then came Sunday service. Choirs dressed in pale, minimal clothing. Harmonies that felt like sunrise. Songs that turned stadiums into sanctuaries. Crowds wept, swayed, raised hands. In those moments, it was easy to believe something sacred was happening. But the spectacle was inseparable from the man. The cameras were there, the guests were famous, the settings were curated with almost cinematic precision. It looked like worship, but it also looked like branding, and the world couldn't decide which one it was, a revival or a reinvention. When Kanye released Jesus is King, the album raced to the top of the charts. Gospel, once treated as niche, suddenly dominated mainstream conversation carried by a figure who had once defined secular excess. People who had written him off returned with curiosity, some returned with hope, because it's hard to resist a redemption story. Yet beneath the hymns and declarations, the tension remained. Kanye's faith sounded sincere, but it also sounded like something else, a desperate attempt to impose order on an internal storm. A rigid structure built to hold back chaos. Faith became a framework, a way to rename impulses as purpose, a way to turn criticism into persecution, a way to transform contradiction into calling. And while the public watched this spiritual metamorphosis, something far more intimate was unraveling in the background: his marriage. Kanye's relationship with Kim Kardashian had always existed under an impossible spotlight, two global icons trying to build a private home in a public arena. At first they looked like an empire: influence, wealth, cultural dominance. But power does not automatically produce peace. Sometimes it produces distance. As Kanye's worldview shifted, the gap widened. His religious intensity grew. His public behavior grew more unpredictable. His emotional swings became harder to contain. And the more he searched for certainty, the more the people closest to him felt like they were living beside a moving tide, never sure when calm would become flood. Then the internet became the stage. Kanye's emotions stopped being private. They spilled onto social media in real-time messages, accusations, pleas, sudden turns from love to anger to grief. Strangers watched a marriage strain like a wire pulled too tight. Every post felt like a flare in the night sky, bright, alarming, and impossible to ignore. For fans, it was heartbreaking. For critics, it was proof. For Kanye, it seemed like necessity, like he could not keep the pain inside anymore. In 2021, the story reached the point many had sensed for years. Kim Kardashian filed for divorce. And suddenly, the rebirth looked different. The gospel era was still there. The choir still sang. The language of redemption still filled the air. But now it was layered over something raw and human: loss. Because when a man builds his identity on certainty, separation becomes more than heartbreak. It becomes collapse of self. Kanye's faith promised a new beginning, but his life was entering a season of endings. And what comes next is not a quiet chapter of healing. It's the moment when public persona, private pain, and unchecked power collide until the fall becomes unavoidable. In 2022, the collapse didn't arrive like a slow decline. It arrived like a door slamming shut, loud enough that even the people who had defended him for years couldn't pretend they didn't hear it. For a long time, Kanye West had survived controversy by doing what he always did: making the next thing bigger. A bigger album, a bigger show, a bigger idea. He could outpace consequences with momentum. But this time, the words weren't just messy, they were radioactive. A series of public statements targeting Jewish people triggered a response that wasn't simply outrage, it was rupture. Brands, collaborators, and platforms faced a choice: keep treating Kanye as an untouchable genius, or finally treat him like a liability. The world watched something rare happen in celebrity culture. People stopped negotiating. Then came the moment that made the situation irreversible. Kanye gave an interview in which he spoke about Adolf Hitler in a way that was widely condemned as praise, not ambiguity, not misunderstood sarcasm. The kind of language that forces a line to be drawn in permanent ink. And once that line was drawn, the system that had once amplified him began to erase him. Adidas, his most powerful business partner, ended the relationship. That single decision detonated his empire overnight. The numbers changed in public. The billionaire story collapsed into a headline about billions lost, like a scoreboard turning dark. But the financial hit was only the surface. Because money can be rebuilt. Reputation can be rebuilt. Even controversy can be survived if the culture still wants you. This time, the culture didn't. Suddenly, Kanye wasn't a headline you disagreed with. He was a risk you couldn't touch. Events distanced themselves. Industry doors that once opened with a phone call became locked with silence. Projects dissolved. Invitations vanished. And something colder took its place. Isolation. This is the terrifying part of fame. When it turns on you, it doesn't just take away applause, it takes away oxygen. You realize how many relationships were built on access, not affection, on proximity to power, not loyalty to a person. Kanye had once been the center of an entire universe: music, fashion, media, influence. In 2022, that universe began to collapse inward. He went from cultural king to cultural outcast, not through a single scandal, but through a chain reaction that kept escalating until there was nowhere left to stand. And yet, even as the consequences intensified, Kanye didn't retreat into silence. He doubled down. He framed himself as persecuted, misunderstood, punished for telling the truth. He spoke as if the loss of partnerships was proof that he was right, proof that the world was afraid of him. It was the same pattern, just louder. Resistance became confirmation. Backlash became evidence. Isolation became martyrdom. But there was one difference now: the audience that once played along stopped laughing. The spectacle stopped being entertaining. The story stopped being genius versus the system. It became something darker. A man with immense influence speaking in ways that caused real harm, while the people who once protected him stepped back in fear. And in that silence, after the contracts, after the headlines, after the empire cracked, another question emerged heavier than the earlier controversies. What happens when a person builds his identity on being untouchable, and then discovers he's touchable after all? Because the fall wasn't just about losing money or deals. It was about losing the world's permission to keep pretending it was only art. And what comes next is not a comeback montage. It's the aftermath where the noise fades, the crowd disappears, and the person left behind has to face what remains when the spotlight is gone. This was the journey of Kanye West, from rejection to reinvention, from genius to isolation. A story of brilliance that reshaped music, challenged culture, and then fractured under its own weight. His art still echoes. The influence is undeniable. The controversy is unresolved. Some see a visionary overwhelmed by mental illness. Others see an artist who crossed lines and must live with the consequences. And many are left wondering how much responsibility belongs to the individual and how much belongs to a system that rewards instability as long as it produces greatness. Because this story isn't only about Kanye. It's about what we celebrate, what we excuse, and how quickly admiration turns into abandonment when the spectacle stops being entertaining. If this journey made you uncomfortable, thoughtful, or conflicted, that's not an accident. These are the stories worth sitting with. So if you found value here, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who still debates this legacy, and subscribe to stay with us as we continue exploring the stories behind power, belief, and collapse. And if you have your own perspective, leave it in the comments. Not to argue, but to reflect. Because Kanye West's story may be paused, but the questions it raises are far from over, and the next one might be closer to home than we think.